So I want to go back to what you said, is the power that women have the power. And I think that there's a balance between men and women. I think we got very different jobs, but we're much more powerful when we work to figure out how to work together.
Yeah.
And that women are the life givers. So, and that women are like the power of, you said, the power of life. I think the power of love, the power of family, the power of connection, all of us.
Yes.
It's all of us. So I think that is a lot of the power of the feminine. And that what's become interesting and what's been rewarded is masculine power, so that there's a lot of women that have embodied masculine power.
Yes.
And I don't think there's a problem with that. You want to do that, knock yourself out. I don't really see it as a problem. But I think that it's women are connected to everything. Men are more fixed. Men are more
Yes.
of one thing.
Yes.
Women, I think, are connected to
Yeah.
everything. And there's a saying about whatever you can do, I can do better. Is talking about, that's a high school thing, a junior school thing that I heard, where girls would say to boys. And I actually kind of believe that.
Yeah.
Is that in many ways, women can do whatever they want to do. But of all the things, shrinking and narrowing their connection to themselves and all that is, and being able to just narrow themselves to masculine behaviors is, I think a lot of people are starting to realize now what they've lost.
Yeah.
And maybe a woman being, taking on a lot of masculine behavior is more of the booby prize than actually, what their greater satisfaction is. So being able, but until we change the rewards, until we change how we reward that and how we look at that reward, because there's a lot, like having to be a masculine sociopathy type kind of alpha male isn't really satisfying to most males, let alone females.
Yeah.
So, like for me as a male, is that I have needs to direct things and have whether it's social or work or what have you, or community. I want to have a say in how things work, because I think I have some pretty good ideas about how things work. But when it turns into an alpha male, excuse my French, but pissing match, I have no interest. I don't have the energy to actually do that. And I'm generally not that interested in the work or the community or the social that's what they're doing. It's more of that good ideas can come from anywhere. And there's more of an inquiry and more that there's a way to make it work for everybody, as opposed to having one person at the top and still have it, go somewhere, be directed somewhere. So...
Yeah, well, I mean, in Tantrism, we see that the masculine really want to receive direction from the feminine. It's a loop, and she will be fed by his support.
Yes.
And so she has the greater overview and the wisdom of the heart. So the intellect, which is mainly a male ability, is really relevant for society. I mean, science and mathematics and, we don't have to go along and list it, but there is a lot that the intellect can do for a community that then work the intellect through the heart.
Yes.
And that's the feminine wisdom, which also lives in the heart of many men. So also, I'm talking about quality, and then we have men and women that tend to embody more so of one, but we're also generalizing. There are beautiful men that embody extreme feminine quality, and they could be great wise leader. There are some natural
very
leader
few of them are actually the leader, though.
Yes.
There's lots of men that actually have a more balanced set of traits, but as long as it's an alpha male of how the leaders are being chosen, and that's okay. The second that we start getting together and start going, you know what, this alpha male thing, just no. And that, we're not going to use these kinds of behaviors to be able to determine who's going to run this. And that's more of, it's social agreements. We need social agreements about how we choose our leaders and how we're going to interact with them. And what is the social agreement? Our default social agreements are survival-based. And until we become conscious of that and go, okay, that's what they are, and these are the consequences of that, and then what are the other options, and then doing some trial and error and try to figure out how to do something different, we're pretty much stuck with what we have.
Yeah. But you see, is that we get to the point where we be on survival mode. Now it's time to thrive. And I think we need to become very aware of this. And perhaps in this movement, there is a natural movement. What you said before, when the girls say to the boys, whatever you can do, we can do better. It's brilliant, and it's so true. And I feel that with feminism, women needed to show themselves, the men and the world, that they could do everything a man does and better, and have kids on top of it, which it's been a big struggle. I don't think you can have children on top of doing everything, because they require a lot of time and attention, and they did.
Lots did.
And I think a lot of it goes to the determinant of kids, which are our future. So it's the next society. Now we've got a lot of children with not a lot of family attention, because the women were so busy showing everybody that they could do it all. And so the next level there, we have this in tantrism, we call it junior masculine, when the women are matching the man in their junior expression, because when you go into senior is, yes, I can do everything you do better than you, and I don't have to show you anymore. Because we just know that is how it is. And that's senior level, maturity level. So then we are
Is that senior masculine? Is that what you're calling that?
Yeah, it's senior everything, masculine and feminine for me. I call it mature feminine, senior masculine. It's the real director of the company, where he can just sit back and doesn't have to run around.
Okay. I thought you were just talking about
off.
women. I thought you were just talking about women.
Yeah, but these are level of maturity. We all, also the woman goes into her own junior masculine, the masculine that needs to prove, that can do things. And when you go into maturity, you go into the deeper feminine, actually, where she doesn't need to show it, she knows it.
Yes.
And so it can be women and men. And so in the case of feminism, I think we've seen it, that women can do it all. The men knows it. So I feel there is a place where the women can stop running around showing it off and drop into their deeper knowing that we know we can do it. But do we have to do it now?
I think that women are only going to drop into a deeper feminine, like ones that have gone a little bit more masculine, is when there's a reason to. When, they can feel it inside themselves, that there's something missing, that there's more feminine traits that would give them more pleasure. But there's also men that they've also have an experience of men being able to connect with them, and we can put the pieces together in a way that is feeding both of us.
Yes, absolutely. And I want to know if it's really satisfying for a lot of women to run a company and drive around the whole day and have no time to be at home with their children, if this is what we really want. Because I think this is a big of the big story, that was put out there, that we also want to go out of the house and have worked. And then when you go out of the house and you work the whole fucking days, is really so...
Is that really,
an achievement?
Is that first prize?
It's first prize, because as a mother, I tell you, no, for me, if I could stay home the whole day and engage in artistic activity and be with my child, I would rather go for that than making the money.
Well, me too.
Exactly.
I don't know. I do the things I want to do.
Yeah. So for me, it's to surrender to the truth now. Is it really what we want? Maybe we just need to go out there and prove to everybody, ourselves first, that we can also do it, that we are not lesser than anybody because we chose to be at home. And I think now that we've done this, it's even more, for me, this maturity to realize that to have time, to have the ability to be with time, perhaps that's the ultimate maturity. And now we're learning that running around to try to make the money, it's really developing our human ability, the true human talents, how to be a human in the world, to make the money, or perhaps what we need again, and we go back in the survival scheme, is to have a home, to have food on the table, to have shelter at night, and then we can thrive as human beings. We can come together more often, we can dance, we can sing, we can make love, we can come together in community. Of course, we need shelter and food in order to do that. So when we overcome the survival requirement that we need to go out there and make the money for this, then we can thrive as human beings. So now I'm feeling that in the billion of people that we are out here now, do we all of us 8 billion of us go out and run around and make this dance to show off how good we are to make money. Is that what we really need to make more money? I think now, for me, we need more creativity, which is it's a trait of feminism, but it also lives in the body of men. You know, the dancer, the artist, creative thinking, where perhaps, you know, with the intelligence we have now, with the technology you have now, we don't all need to go out there and make money so much as you used to.
Well, I don't know. I think it's getting worse in that way. But I think what you're pointing to is that I didn't know this conversation was going to get this wide, but society is really not set up, and I do use the word set up, to encourage people to be their gifts and to be what they are. We don't even really support the arts, let alone. So, and there's a thinking that, I don't remember what the philosophy was, that it was more for the kings and queens. I'm told that it was like on the bed table of Queen Elizabeth, for example. And the question was asked is that if the monarchies want to stay in power, you know, what's the system that's required to do that? And what was required is that there had to be winners and losers. So to have a pyramid, you actually have to have the people that are in the middle, and then you have to have the people that are on the bottom. And that there was a guy that I knew in
But this is for monarchy to survive.
Yes,
yeah?
and this is
Winner
a pyramid.
loser.
Yeah, winners and losers, and that's very. And school is set up around that. It is set up around competition. It is set up around left brain abilities, and that there's all these people that fall outside of what's going on in schools, because it's looking at IQ, and it's looking at there was a guy that I knew that measured 127 different kinds of intelligence other than IQ, and all these kids that didn't fit in the IQ system would find out what their actual intelligence, what their intelligence was.
Yeah.
They did this or they did that, and it wasn't something that is recorded in IQ and something that is not embraced or has even a place in the traditional school system.
Yeah.
So you know, all of that is about society, is being able, like, we need to evolve as people. Like, these things aren't happening independently. We need to evolve as men and women. We're not going backwards. It's something new that we don't know yet. And also being able to take a look at how society works. And that's a pretty big conversation, but I can't go on in the conversation without acknowledging it. And now I want to go back a little bit, and I want to go and take a look at actually the word of toxic, because we've gone, you know, pretty far forward in solution. And now where we are is, then what started this conversation was actually talking about toxic masculinity.
What is toxic masculinity
well,
you when you speak in this
toxic
way?
masculinity is, I think that it might be better for you to go first, because I'm going to go.
For me, it's like, you know, this is a very big conversation, but it has to be like this, because when we spread it so far out, like I did, for me, I go back and think, and there is toxicity and a healthy way to be a human being. It's neither masculine nor feminine. There are ways of wanting power that are toxic, meaning they're not supporting the natural development of this majestic mystery that is the human being. And so everything that doesn't support the healthy development of a human being, to me, is toxic. And so it is either comes from men and also can come from women. And I think what is generally associated with men, it's everything that is hierarchical. So it's the pyramid. So the power play is associated with toxic masculinity, you know. I'm going
Can I jump in there?
Yeah, please.
With the toxic masculinity is that, and specifically the hierarchy, is that I think you can have hierarchies that are, it's really about how much you've moved away from your humanness, and how much that the people aren't important and the power is.
Yes.
And the more, and you know it's toxic or it's not working when it's not working for the majority of people.
Yeah.
That's a pretty far down the line sign of symptom of that it's not working. Okay, so I just want to, I'm going to kind of change, I just want to add an element to toxic, is that when I first hear toxic, I'm going, you know, I do mediation, I do conflict resolution, I bring groups of people together in a lot of different ways. And if you're going to use toxic, it's not really a terminology that if you're looking to resolve something, it's not, toxic isn't a way to do that, because it has to be toxic from, what we're talking about is that you're toxic, and that, here's a toxic issue, and that somebody needs to be wrong, especially in this. I'm just going to start with with toxic masculinity and not get to the feminine. Is toxic isn't a useful terminology.
Yeah.
How about, and toxic masculinity means all of us.
Yeah.
And that no, it's not all of us, and it's not everything, and it's not even a healthy way to even talk about it. Is that there's some things that aren't working. I don't want to call it toxic. I want to just, and it isn't all of us. And I think that for all the toxic masculinity that there is, I think there's a fairly large subgroup of females that are doing exactly the same masculine toxic behaviors and applying them to men and women. Yeah. So I don't think it's just about masculinity. I think it's a certain set of behaviors that we actually have to. So if we want, I think we need to reframe it, is what I'm saying. Reframe toxic masculinity into something that we can actually solve, because we can't solve toxic masculinity. The way it's framed, it's impossible. Also, it's a really great opportunity to vilify. I think that's about the greatest success of calling it that. But actually solving it is not. As long as you have toxic masculinity, it's not solvable.
Yeah, because then it means that every man starts from the point of view that they feel themselves as toxic, so not welcome. And it's like throwing the baby with the bathwater.
Definitely.
So everything that also comes that is positive and uplifting and of great service for community gets shranked away and thrown away with every man, like this rejection of everything that belongs to the male category. I found it also, to use this terminology, it's what is toxic. Is using this language
as well.
Is intoxicating the person that speaks like that. Because when you address, trait of personality as toxic, it's the one that is expressing in that way. It's also
toxic. Yes, it is toxic.
Yeah.
Well, the brush that you're using is that masculinity is toxic. So all masculinity, and therefore all men and all behaviors.
Yeah.
So there's nothing good about men.
Yeah.
We're actually men don't feel good about who they are. And the majority of those men are being crushed under the same hierarchical principles at the same time.
Yeah.
So not only are they not the cause of it, and not necessarily contributing much or anything to it, but they're also being held under, drowning under the weight of it. So I don't think it's particularly useful at all. Let me ask you a question. So in regards, I've never heard about toxic femininity, and I've certainly never heard it from any of these people that are talking about toxic masculinity. There's almost zero accountability whatsoever that the feminine has anything to do with what's going on. That there's no contribution, there's no accountability in any kind of way that, we contribute to this, well, even in the smallest ways. So what do you feel about that? What is, why does my mind go there? Is there something useful there for you as well?
Well, I think it's very important that accountability is a beautiful quality of femininity. You are responsible of your reality. You need to be accountable. So if I'm calling the man in my reality toxic, I need to be accountable that there is a responsibility that I also have, because they're manifesting in my reality. And so if I didn't have toxicity in my reality, I wouldn't manifest toxic men.
Okay.
So in fact, I want to say that in my personal experience, I keep meeting amazing, beautiful, sensitive, vulnerable, wondrous men, because this is the reality I choose to live in. So I think that the women that keep encountering toxic men in their life, they need to look at what is toxic in their perception of themselves, that they don't want to accept, and so it's much easier to throw onto someone else.
Well, so, I want to match that from my side, is that I absolutely love the feminine, and I've been very blessed in having absolutely amazing women around me as friends and lovers and partners. So I've absolutely loved the feminine, and that's the reality that I'm creating, and that's how I live. But in saying the part that you said about accountability and about that's a beautiful thing for the feminine accountability, is the way that I look at it is that yin and yang is everywhere. There's always a balance. So to whatever degree, and I think this might be a good starting point to restart this conversation of man, women, because I believe that the answers for women are in men and the answers for men are in women. And the only way we're going to actually move forward, how else could we move forward, since we have very different perspectives and point of views, if as individuals, but also as genders. There is some generalities of how we look at things that can only be served, and the answers are in when we come together. We actually have to make peace and be able to own our own stuff and talk about evolving and making things better, which is a trial and error. It's new territory. And back to the yin and yang part, to the people that are talking about masculine toxicity, and that, but there's no conversation about how the feminine, so you're not dealing with a whole. You're only dealing with a half.
Yes, that's exactly my point. So the one that called for toxicity, is it toxicity inside?
Yes, there's a toxicity in it, but
yes.
I just want to finish one line to that, is that if there's, in the yin and yang, to whatever degree, and I absolutely agree, men in general annoy me too, so I get it. I even annoy myself. So, but there's in the yin and yang is to the whatever degree the men are out of balance in some way, the femininity has to be out of balance in some way as well. And those things operate as a whole, not as a half.
Yes.
You can't go, that half needs to change.
Yes.
That's completely unrealistic.
Absolutely, and I agree with you, because every time we call the male toxicity, sometimes is in also the abuse of sexual power, is because the women let that happen. It's the same things that the mother let the kids take drugs. Women let men touch their ass 15 times before they say something. Why? Why this woman doesn't turn around and say, no, thank you, this is not okay for me, what are you doing? I remember when I first traveled to India 20 years ago, I always hear of story of women being harassed by men, and I was never being harassed because I would stop it immediately by raising my voice and saying it out loud, why you've got your hand on my thighs, while I was sitting in the bus. And this man, because now he's been exposed, retrieved immediately and was terrified of me now because I would expose it.
Sure.
And so the question is, a big question, is why women don't feel they have the right to say it.
Is it the right? Because sometimes I think it's,
the duty.
I think there's more. No, but there is a duty. Yes, and I do think, but I'm not sure that the problem is having a right. For some of them, definitely, that they don't feel like they can say that because it's too embarrassing for them. It's too embarrassing for them. For whoever they're going to do it to, it's too much. They can't handle that. I get that. Not having the right or being able to be comfortable with taking that right. Yes. But I think there's other things that are involved as well. Sometimes is that it could be that people allow things happen so that they can complain about it.
Yes, absolutely. So that's where the toxicity is both sides. What I was trying to get here is that if the men have gone out of hand, and here's is even a pun intended,
okay,
with their sexuality, is because the feminine allowed them to. They had no guidance. They maybe lost themselves in the attraction towards women, into the mesmerizement, the enchantment of the female body.
Yes.
And they never had a measure. They never had the woman to say, this is not okay, this is okay, you can go to this extent, you cannot do this. And so that we could have keep educating them in what it's okay and what is not okay, which now we call him toxic.
Okay, well,
but we always had a play in that. Either we were You know, and of course the conversation can be really big in Taliban, Afghanistan. Of course the women don't have a say and they
Yes.
cannot answer that. Yes, I agree to all of that. But it's interesting because all this conversation of toxicity come from very well educated, westernized country where women have had enough education even to now sit and have this conversation, and yet they still feel they victimize themselves into the big conversation around sexuality. And I mean, we've got it with the Me Too movement where, of course, now with responding that a lot of women could only get a movie part only if they were sleeping with the producer, you know. And this again is the big dance thinking, okay, but I still wanted power. I still wanted that role in that movie. I wanted something out of this dynamic.
Sure, I submitted.
I submitted. So I allow this dynamic to happen because I had a gain in the dance. And
Yes.
I'm not trying to point the finger at anybody. I think we are
But I think
all
that had to happen. I think that happened for decades and decades and decades ago, and that was what was going to happen, but we don't have to do that now. Like, I mean, the lid's off that one.
The lid is off that one. And also what I'm saying that shows off is that if this thing were exposed from the beginning, we would have never run for such a long extent. There will be no more women available to have a movie part, and then
They
there
had
would
to
have
make
been-
it public, just
Yes,
like you did. It had to be
yes.
public, and women had to get together and say, no, we're not doing this.
Yes,
and
and
if
then there
all
would
the
have
women
been
wouldn't sign
there
up, because
would have
somebody
been
would.
no women
Somebody-
in the movie
Right,
any longer.
right.
And so we would have had to find other creative solution of the men would have started to understand, okay, this is not the way to go around it because we want women in the movie, like we want to have happy women in our life.
Yes.
We want to have women that contribute to society. So, you know, the toxicity is two ways. When women become victim, it's another way to slight manipulate from the back seat
Yeah.
and find power there.
Yes.
So that's the double toxicity.
But I think, I think that was the way it was. I mean, you go back to caveman days, is that men were the security, they had the food, they were stronger, they protected them, they had all the power. Women actually had to figure out, how to operate from the back seat. And they were designed, like there's some natural talent in being able to do that.
Yeah, but I think in a way it was also always an exchange, because
Yeah, it was
it's
an
good
exchange.
to be provided for. It's good that someone come home with food at the end of the day,
But yeah,
So I
there's
can
a lot of downside to that. But I'm saying in history, from caveman days up to, because the point that you made is that if we would have done something different then, I'm thinking 30s, 40s, and 50s of the golden movie age, and that was all happening then. I don't think it was supposed to change then. I don't think it could have changed then. Now it can actually change. These are the things we need to apply now.